Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz Podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 357, and today's guest is Brian Liu, serial entrepreneur and co-founder of companies like LegalZoom, BizCounsel, and Overture. Lots of the best ideas come from experience within your own industry, and it was Brian and his co-founder Brian Liu, who has since gone on to be a co-founder of ShoeDazzle and The Honest Company, who both had experience in the law industry and saw the law industry as an opportunity that was ripe for disruption. After experimenting with some ideas, the idea for LegalZoom had the best validation for building a company, and some of the most successful founders take bold risks. For example, to bring validation for consumers about the legitimacy of their business for legal docs, they cold called and got Robert Shapiro, yes, that high-profile attorney from the OJ Simpson trial, involved in the business. And then they were off and running, which ultimately led to growing the dominant platform in their industry and later a publicly traded company. Brian's latest company is Overture, an attorney-to-attorney referral platform for solo and small firms. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like a discussion about the impact and potential that AI has for the legal industry, Brian's background story and his experience as a practicing attorney, the full life cycle story of LegalZoom, including the Robert Shapiro cold call and how they scaled the company, all the details about Overture, Brian's work as an advisor for entrepreneurs like Julia Rogers from Hello Prenup, who was featured in episode 336 of the VentureFizz Podcast, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. Did you know that you can watch our podcast interviews on YouTube? Head over to youtube.com/VentureFizz to access our channel, and you'll find a library of content, including a podcast playlist. And while you're there, make sure you click on the subscribe button. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Brian. Brian, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Keith. Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to talk to you because we originally connected. You were one of the speakers at Startup Boston Week, so we connected through those channels. And obviously, you've accomplished so much throughout your career about LegalZoom and what you're up to now. So we're going to talk about all that. But I thought just based on your background, it would be a perfect opportunity to get into the world that everybody's talking about, that being AI, but how that actually applies to the law industry, which seems like there's a lot of interesting use cases for that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, AI has got the potential more than anything else to truly democratize the law. And it's a huge thing. I mean, the law is just it's a jungle. It is absolutely chaotic. And if AI can make a sense out of it, and if they can make it accessible to average everyday Americans, I mean, it's going to be a game changer.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, like I could just see when you read law, it's like, what did I just read? I can't comprehend whatever that was. But that would be like a large language model, an LLM that would just like simplify it for the consumer, just saying, hey, this is what that means. So.
Right. I mean, people are talking about, I mean, obviously there's all these legal technology companies, but the way I think about it is, dispute resolution in the courts, because the way we go about doing things is incredibly complicated, incredibly expensive, to the point where, you have a business dispute, and it's really sad. You have business dispute and it's worth less than $50,000, $100,000. It's not even worth taking it to court. You can threaten it, but and if it's above the small claims limit of like 5,000 or 10,000, then you're really screwed. Anything in between, you're screwed.
Yeah, no, it's a huge, huge opportunity. So I'm sure lots of entrepreneurs are thinking about it and coming up with new ideas that maybe they can get funded by you or something like that. So, well, let's rewind the clock. Let's talk about your background. So where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Boy, that's really reminding. I was born in Taiwan and I grew up in Seattle. And I think, boy, what was I like a child? That's a good question. If I was to look back on it, I was a closeted rebel.
Nice.
I wanted everybody to think that I wasn't. And that's probably a good way to put it. Closeted rebel.
And then what led you to study biochemistry at UCal Berkeley?
Oh, geez. Someone put into my head a long time ago that medicine was the way to go. And I went and took some of those classes, pre-med. I did okay. And then by the time I realized I wanted to go in a different direction, I didn't want to spend another year and a half, changing my major, taking additional courses. So I just finished it. I just continued finishing it. And I took some other poli-sci classes and other fun stuff that I kind of liked. And most of my friends were doing that. And a lot of my friends were going to law school. And that's kind of like how I got that into my head that I'm like, maybe I could go to law school as well.
So that's obviously what brought you to UCLA to study law there. And then you started your career actually as a practicing attorney, right?
I did. I I kind of knew that I wasn't going to be practicing law forever because I just wasn't. Once I got into it, you can kind of tell, what I didn't want to be a partner at a large firm, but I figured I've got to do something. I've spent 3 years in school. I've got to do something with the degree, because you actually don't get any practical experience and you don't really learn anything, that will teach you how to be a real lawyer in school. And that's not what they do. That's almost like a liberal arts education. They teach you how to think like a lawyer, but not actually do anything that a lawyer does. I mean, it's funny. You take a whole semester long course on wills and trusts, and you know what? The one thing you don't know how to do is to write a simple will for anybody. For my parents, like that's because that's what they wanted. That's what they were hoping would happen when I graduated from law school.
All right, so, but when you started as a practicing attorney, like you were actually in the world of like corporate finance, M&A, IPOs. So was that geared towards the tech industry of that moment of
No, at
time,
that
or?
time was geared purely towards finance. I was like a lot of other people. We were looking for greener pastures. We thought we wanted to be investment bankers and transfer over to Goldman Sachs. That's what a lot of my friends at the firm did. It was
Mhm.
actually a common stepping stone for people. I thought about that. I've kind of wanted to, think about it, but then I talked to my friends who had actually gone to work at Goldman Sachs, and they didn't seem like they were having that much more fun. They got paid more, but it didn't seem like they were really enjoying themselves that much better than what we were doing at the law firm.
So what were the types of customers or clients that you were representing?
You know, I still remember for the most part, large companies, large, publicly traded companies. And one of the first projects I did when I was at the firm was we did like bond offerings. I think like $2 or $3 billion worth of bond offerings for a big healthcare client. And some people would have thought that was really cool. And I'm drafting these documents. I don't even know what I'm doing, really. You just kind of get thrown into this and you've got to learn on the fly. And I remember a couple of months later, I'm going to the closing, right? But before the closing, which always happens at 8 in the morning, 7 in the morning, because it's got to happen in New York time, I'm here in LA. But that night I was working till probably 10 a.m. I mean 10 p.m. And I remember being by myself in an empty parking lot in downtown Los Angeles. And I remember the new BMW I bought because now I got a nice job at a big firm. And I just wanted to crash that thing into a wall because I'm like, you know what? This is what I'm doing. I'm working and we're working like a slave. I'm working like a dog and I'm not enjoying anything. It's, you're doing work for some big multinational client. There's no enjoyment out of it. And I'm doing all this so I can buy this car. I don't want this car anymore. And that's why I was just thinking, God, this is just terrible. So I was thinking about getting out of there as fast as I could. But the one thing that was pretty lucky for me was because I was so low end on the totem pole, we had one client who was a former uh, chief financial officer of a large bank that had gotten merged and has gotten sold to Wells Fargo. And so he was doing something on his own. And because he was, a client of the firm and now he's kind of on by himself, the main partner of the firm said, Brian, why don't you help this guy? You're I'm too expensive now. The other guys are too good. You're a young guy. Why don't you learn something about banks? And so, it's one guy, he bought one bank and he went from two banks to three banks. And, I realized I really, really enjoyed working with him and other small clients like that because you got a sense that you were actually making an impact, direct impact on people's lives. And that really, struck me. And by the way, today, to this date, I'm still friends with this guy.
Well, that's a perfect segue. So how did you get involved in entrepreneurship and starting your own company?
So again, even when I was in law school, I was thinking that I wasn't going to be a practicing lawyer forever. When the internet hit, this is late 90s, like anybody else, my best friend in law school, Brian Liu and I, we ended up starting LegalZoom together. He was the same way. He was like, that's why I think we became good friends. We knew we weren't going to be, your typical lawyer. And we started looking around for all these other businesses, like what can we do? And we had, a bunch of different cool ideas, like, really cool internet retailers but we realized the only thing we knew was that we had some experience working at the law firms. We knew the law. I mean, we went to law school for 3 years. At that time, working at firms for 3 years. I mean, if we decided to do like, online retailing or something like that, we wouldn't be any better than anybody else graduating from high school. And they'd probably be better at computer programming than us. So that's how we were playing around with different ideas. Um, One day I remember coming back from a business trip and I was at the airport. And this is back in the days when they actually had these weekly newspapers. And there was an ad for a company called We the People. And they were a legal document service. And they were advertising things like doing wills, trusts, in business incorporations. And they were charging like $400 or $500 for a business incorporation. And I was like, wow, you know what? I think I could do one of those. I mean, I've done one of those. I've done some of those for smaller clients. It's not that difficult. And then what was really surprising to me was that this company had 6 offices in Southern California. So I thought, wow, that means there's a demand for something like this. So I saw their model of basically doing legal documents and doing that outside of a lawyer's setting. And I thought, why can't we put this online? Why do we have to go to an office to get this done? And that was kind of like the real genesis of LegalZoom.
That's awesome. That's a great story. But so I found a nugget as I was preparing for this interview. So even before you had that moment in the airport, you and Brian were working on like, so it just shows like you were experimenting, right? There was lawgarden.com. So what was that?
Yeah, do you know how we got the name Law Garden?
I don't.
You're gonna love this one. So Law Garden came around because it's garden kind of sounds a little bit like a jungle, but it was a nicer form of a jungle. And what was the most popular internet company at the time? Of course, Amazon. So we thought Law Jungle, Law Garden, why not? The colors were green and kind of like, soothing. Yes. And we thought that we could essentially be lawyers online. And we'd answer, people were paying like $2 or $3 per minute to talk to a psychic, on within 1-900 number back then, if you remember those. And
Oh yeah,
so
I totally
why wouldn't
remember
they be
that.
able to do the same thing? Like in a web chat, they didn't really have that technology back then, but really, if you could just email us questions and have little projects for us, and we just do it online, and instead of charging, by the hour, like $300, we charge like $2 per minute, and it'd be more efficient because you can work from home. So that was kind of like the idea at the time.
All right, so I had to include that story, which was awesome. All right, so getting LegalZoom going. So were you still practicing law, like kind of doing LegalZoom on the side? Like, how'd you meet Eddie Hartman, the other co-founder, with you and
Uh,
Brian? Or
Brian Lee will tell this story better, but we had the idea for LegalZoom for a while. We are at that time, bouncing it around different people, see who we can recruit. And we had already signed up Robert Shapiro because we basically reached out to him. We cold called him and said, we got this great idea. And, somehow we managed to get a meeting with him. even though he was like, I don't want to talk to you guys, but Brian Lee somehow managed to hold him on the phone for a few minutes to the point where he said, oh, it's kind of interesting. Let's take a meeting. And so that's, how we met Robert Shapiro. Eddie Hartman was a friend of another Eddie's. So there was two Eddies and two Brians, Eddie Rue and Eddie Hartman. Eddie Rue was the designer, and he was Brian Lee's friends from college. So he worked at the same consultancy as Eddie Hartman. And they basically were, working on the side, and then they quit. And then Eddie Rue was still doing other things. He was doing art design, but Eddie Hartman programmed essentially the entire, website. And at that time, it was really difficult to find people who knew how to program this stuff. And he knew database stuff. So he did the whole back end system for LegalZoom at the same time, and just basically did it all himself. And I mean, it was incredibly important.
All right. Well, you mentioned Robert Shapiro, right? So that's something I wanted to know more about. So at that point in time, I just like, William Shatner was like the spokesperson for Priceline. So maybe there
Yep.
was that celebrity influencer, but it was very uncommon for
Yeah.
two founders to reach out to this very well known, like I think 5 years prior was, the OJ Simpson case, like he's a very public figure. Like,
Yeah, he
so to
was.
reach out and to that person to get him involved, like what, how did you even come up with that way of thinking?
So we knew, remember, this is the early days of the internet, and there was nothing like this. People weren't comfortable, you know, getting legal documents, doing the law online. And we knew that, we went to a good law school, we worked at great firms, but nobody else really knew that. And so, how can we convince the public that this is legit? It's legal. We're a real business, and the documents are going to hold them in court. We couldn't think of a better way than to associate ourselves with, the most well-known lawyer probably in the world at that time. And it just so happened that he was in Los Angeles. We made a list of all these famous lawyers, and then we kind of like went through a process of elimination. Robert Shapiro was at the top, and he fit every requirement that we had.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant idea. Okay, so how did you get the company started? Like, it seems like it was bootstrapped at first. Like
Oh yeah,
how did like the early days?
it was bootstrap because we had already decided to quit our jobs maybe a month before the initial 2000.com bust. And so, we thought we had money lined up. This is going to be easy. We got Robert Shapiro on board. My friends were getting, millions of dollars thrown at them every here and there. And we thought this was going to be the best business ever. What happened, of course, was that the stock market crashed. That was the very first day, by the way, that afternoon, where we were going to hold a VC meeting. And it was with a family friend, my Uncle Denny. I call him my uncle, but he wasn't my uncle. He's a good family friend. And I still remember me and Brian Lee knocked on the door, at about 4 p.m. And he looked at us and he said, what are you guys doing here? I said, hey, we set up this meeting weeks ago. Remember, we're going to pitch you this new company we got. It's called LegalZoom, and it's going to be about legal documents, and we're going to do all this stuff online. We're going to put the law online. And he kind of like wasn't like look he had looked like all the blood had already drained out of his face, right? Because I think the NASDAQ crashed 15 or 20% that day. And we thought it was, we knew it was bad, but he said, Brian, guys, it's over, man. It's over. Why
The
don't you
internet's
guys
dead.
forget it? Why don't go back, beg for your jobs? Don't do this. It's over. And we couldn't believe he was saying this. I'm like, what do you mean? And I remember, like really bewildered. Brian Lee and I were like, geez, we sat down and what are we going to do? How are we going to go now? What? And so we did what any two sensible people would do. We went to Benihana's, which is right next door, across the street, had an early dinner, had a couple beers. And we said, you know what? This business is such a good, viable business doesn't matter. We're going to pursue this anyway. I don't care how the economy is. The internet stuff is going to happen. Maybe we won't get the financing, but we're going to really, we had a viable business model. We were going to charge people money for creating legal documents. And trust me, people didn't understand that. They didn't understand that we were going to charge people money for things that they already were paying for. And we're going to do it at a better price and make it more affordable and more attractive, for them. I thought it made perfect business sense, but other people didn't. So we went and tried everything we could to raise money. I mean, everything. We took so many pitches. We met with all these finance people. And I mean, in the end, we raised $333,500 in our first round. And I
Wow.
still remember that exact amount because the 500 especially was a good one, right? Because first we're asking people $10,000 minimum, 5,000. And we were so desperate. I was so desperate. It's like, look, $500, all you got, I'll take it. That's why we had
You're on
such
the
a
cap
small
table.
amount. But it literally was every time you sat down, over Thanksgiving dinner with friends and family, anytime you were anywhere, I'm pitching. So everybody there, except for one outside investor, actually, no, he was in the second part. Everybody in that first round, everybody was just friends and family. And they probably said yes and gave us a small amount just so that we would stop begging him, bothering.
I'm already in. Leave me alone.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Please don't pitch. I know. Okay, I know. I know.
all right. So where
So,
was like the tax industry at this period of time? Because, like TurboTax and maybe consumers were like, okay, I do my taxes online. So maybe, this should be
it
just
was
another
still
sector.
new. I mean,
Mhm.
everything, even TurboTax was still, you go to Costco or you go to Staples and you buy the latest version of TurboTax in a packaged software box,
Right.
and that was the truth. I mean, legal forms were the same way. You could buy a computer software package, or you could literally go to these bookstores and they have these books. Nolo was a big publisher, and they had a whole book on, writing your own will. And at the very end, they had tear out forms. I mean, pre-perforated pages that you can tear out that you can either type in or write with whatever you need for, to make your own will. I mean, it was insane. And then you had to read this 80-page book beforehand. And we were like, are you kidding me? Come on, nobody's going to do that. We can
Right.
simplify this so much by doing this online.
So when you launch, like what products were available? Like, did you have multiple like wills, trusts, and
Yeah,
business
we did.
formation docs or?
This is something we always did at the beginning because we didn't want to be pigeonholed into one type of document. I mean, we knew that estate planning and business formation were going to be the main things, but we had everything from at the beginning, a bunch of different wills. We had healthcare directives, obviously different types of business formation, trademarks, copyrights. And then we had two really weird things that we only offered for a little while. We did uncontested divorces, and then the weirdest one, we did restraining orders.
Wow.
Yeah, why
You can do
restraining
that
orders?
online.
Yeah. Luckily, we only had one person in the history of LegalZoom order a restraining order. Luckily, because Shapiro said, "Oh yeah, this is a big thing. This is a big deal. It's really important." And it had to be filed with the courts. I had no idea what to do. And I had to personally, we didn't have the restraining order automated at the time. And I basically said, okay, look, I'm going to take you off of the LegalZoom platform. I'm going to personally represent you as a lawyer here because I still have my legal license. And I'm going to do this for you because I had never done this ever in my life. And it's probably the first time I ever stepped into a courtroom. This guy is not listening, but yeah, this is actually true. First time I ever stepped into a courtroom. And and actually I think it kind of worked. We got this restraining order for the guy. But it took me so much time. It took me like, I don't know, a day of like doing research, half a day of appearing in court. I think we got paid $200 for it. And I'm like, you know what? Take that offline. Take that off the website
All
immediately. We're not going to sell another one of those.
right. So what was the moment where you were like, wow, this really is something like traction. Like, how did you get, acquisition of consumers and,
Yeah,
adoption?
that's a good one. I still remember. Brian Lee and I were having dinner at this Japanese restaurant in Little Tokyo. And it was a chicken skewer restaurant, actually. And we at that time we could check and see, our the order status. We could check and see, hey, how are we doing? How many orders did we get? And I remember it was a Friday evening, and before we left for dinner, we had already gotten like 6 orders from like Friday afternoon, from the time we left to our office to the time we got to dinner. It was 6 orders because we'd call Eddie Hartman, because Eddie Hartman was always on the computer. Eddie, how many orders we get? I'm like, 6. I'm like, are you kidding me? And we knew that if there were people on a Friday night looking to make a will or healthcare directive on a Friday night, this thing was going to work.
Now you're dealing with a industry that's regulated, right? There's the bar, right? Like, and there's different states. And so what were the challenges you had to overcome with a regulated industry?
Oh man, there were a lot of challenges. We, I can't even tell you, we operated, I'd say, in a gray area because there was nothing specifically authorizing what we were doing except in the state of California. California actually had a law in the books regulating and saying what we were doing is legit and fine. Other states didn't have that. And every state defines the practice of law a little differently. And at the time, there were a few states that even defined the practice of law as this. They said, practice of law is basically, are those things that lawyers have traditionally done. Like, wait a second, that's it? So there wasn't any definition, but there were a bunch of exceptions. We know there's a First Amendment right to publish. There's free speech, but then there's the right that you can publish legal information. Legal information is not, the practice of law. So you can tell people that's how all these do-it-yourself books came around. So that was a well-established, exception. And then the other exception is you can help people fill out forms so long as you're acting as, quote, a scrivener. And what does a scrivener do? Well, some people's handwritings weren't that good. Maybe not everybody could actually write back in the old days in England. But then a scrivener could also correct, do simple clerical and non-legal things. So we had also seen cases where they were, in Texas, they actually wanted to ban one of the software programs for making a will, I think. And then it was a very weird thing that happened. The court had actually first ruled that it was the practice of law, and Texas was so embarrassed that the legislature had to change their laws to make an exception for essentially computer programs. So we just took all those exceptions and we said, hey, look, there's a long history of what we're doing, and we're just the next evolutionary step. Everything from do-it-yourself books to self-help guides to online software packages. And we're just taking it online. That's it.
So, you were the company's CEO for, a very long duration of time. Like, what were your biggest lessons learned during that stretch?
Wow. There were so many of them. I think number one most important lesson is hire really smart people and get your core team. You got to have really good people in that core team. I think that's, critical. And you have to understand that at the very beginning, you can kind of, like the founders, we can do a little bit of everything on our own, right? We can, I did everything. I was CEO. I was customer support. I had, a pseudonym for customer support when I did online customer support. We had another guy who was like, the online bad person for collections in case somebody needed, their like credit card declined or something like that. Shoot, I was a janitor for the office. We did everything. But once you reach a certain number of people, and I'd say it was about 15 people, it's really, really hard to organize, without some sort of professional help. And because one thing we always wanted to do was we thought ideally, we wouldn't have middle management. Everybody would just they would just know their roles. And you didn't have to, there was nobody who's a boss. Everybody just did their thing because they knew that this is what they're supposed to do. And that idealism lasts until you're about 15 people when you realize like, oh my God, I need like a professional structure now. I need to get this organized. Nothing's working anymore. Nobody knows what they're doing, I didn't come from that background.
All right, so LegalZoom went on to go public in June of 2021. So,
Yeah.
um, what an accomplishment! Like for you, Brian, Robert Shapiro, Eddie, the two Eddies, like from
Yeah.
taking this from ground zero to eventually going public is it's amazing.
I mean, this is exactly what you dream about when you start any company. You dream that one day it's gonna, grow up, be on its own, it's gonna go public. I mean, there's nothing better than that. Absolutely. It's a huge accomplishment. And it's a few years ago now, and people always ask me, do you ever think this would happen? And I have to tell you, yes, I did, of course. I mean, that's why you do this. Of course you think you're gonna reach those goals. Yeah.
All right, so you're working on a different company, so Overture Law. So what is Overture?
So Overture, there's something we did before. So I left LegalZoom in 2018. I was first CEO and then chairman. And I even when I was like on the board, I was doing some other stuff. I was doing some real estate investment. I even helped run a beverage company for a little bit. And what I learned from that is, when you go outside of an area, I I, I needed to stay in my lane because going outside of my lane, I had no advantage over some 20-year-old kid who could outwork me, who was going to do everything they can to learn the beverage business. And it's like, the relationships, I had no relationships. I didn't know anything. I had no advantage. In fact, I was at a disadvantage. So painful lessons for a couple of years there. I said, I'm going to go back into law because I know legal innovation. I know legal technology. And we started a lead generation company for personal injury and mass torts. And what we learned that didn't work out. I'll tell you, it didn't work out because I think we're a little too highbrow, and we didn't want to go. We learned a lot of things about the industry, but it wasn't for us. But what I learned is that these personal injury lawyers get a ton of their business from other lawyers because they're able to share and split some of the revenues that they get. They can split fees with them. And we had always learned in law school that that was illegal. Yet these personal injury lawyers were doing it all the time. They were growing a huge business empire out of this stuff. And we thought, how come this is only, exists for personal injury and contingency fee lawyers? Why can't you do this for people who are, working on estate planning or just business contracts, litigation, anything else, any other branch of law? And we went and really dug into the rules and found out there's actually no prohibition against it. You just have to structure it right, do the documents right. And, that's how we came up with Overture. So Overture is really a business to, attorney to attorney referral platform, primarily for solo attorneys, solo practitioners, and small independent law firms so that they can grow their businesses and they can be essentially extend their practice, in this new world of AI and multi-jurisdictions where people are, your client isn't just a local client anymore. They're going to need help across, different industries. And then as a solo, you kind of do a little of everything and everybody comes to you for referrals. And now you can get tapped into a network of, vetted attorneys who are really like-minded, just like you. And you can confidently refer a client to them. And not only will you earn a referral fee, but you'll look good doing it. You'll look good in terms to your client saying, hey, I know all these people. These guys are really good.
And that's how the world of business works. It's all
Yeah,
referrals. I mean, every service industry counts on referrals for the lion's
absolutely.
share. Um, so it wasn't that it was illegal. It was just frowned upon in the legal industry. It was like, it was kind of
I
taboo
think
to like do it that way or
I think it was misunderstood, and it still
yeah,
is, by the way. So part of our challenge is educating people because it really is like ingrained into a lot of lawyers' heads that somehow this is illegal. But if we have a section on our website where we actually show you here's the laws in your state, right? And in 48 of the states, there's no problem with it.
I don't understand why it would be a
Yeah.
problem if you don't specialize in that law, that there's another
That,
lawyer that is focused on that specialty of law. So why like
exactly
so
right. Because they don't want you to take on a case that you aren't good at. But they
right.
want, but knowing that there's still going to be an economic incentive then, right, for you to refer it, that's why they made it legal. And of course, you have to follow certain rules to do it right. Otherwise, you might be incentivized to say, I might get it wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. So
Right.
this
Yeah.
gives you the opportunity to learn and to earn some income and to really do best for the client in terms of aligning all the incentives.
So like what stage is this business at? Size or number of employees or
Oh
whatever you
yeah.
can share.
We launched only about a year ago, so it's still a pretty young business. And right now there's about 3,500 lawyers on the platform, and we're growing pretty fast. And we're just, it's still in the early stage. Definitely, we've already got a lot of transactions that are being referred through the platform, but we're still in our early phases of growth here.
Now, in addition to Overture, you've been involved with BizCounsel. What are the
Yeah.
details of BizCounsel?
Yeah, BizCounsel was interesting. BizCounsel's morphed into a few things, but it was kind of an extension of what was going on at LegalZoom. It was actually, at one time, it was kind of like it was a way of doing research into potential new products for LegalZoom. And the idea was, how can we extend our, our client reach? How can we essentially continue to, have a relationship with these clients above and beyond just obviously the do-it-yourself law, even the documents, and even just a simple, legal plan? How can we really establish a lifelong relationship with these small business clients? And so it was the idea of creating essentially a fractional general counsel service where instead of paying by the month, you pay a monthly subscription for certain types of legal services. And it can range from, document drafting, document review, and it covers a myriad of things, general conversations, general consultations, and then a certain set number of hours where the lawyer can actually do real legal work for you.
Yeah, I can see how that could be incredibly useful for especially small businesses that need access to attorneys, but are trying to avoid the larger firms that have
Yeah,
outside their budget price range of law.
absolutely. Absolutely. And to this day, it's still a big, there's still a huge gap, right? You've got you've got obviously the large law firms and the big law firms, and then you've got, you know, if you're a small business, you need to be making a certain amount of profit per year, just even to afford a regular lawyer. If you're, if you're moderately profitable, you're doing okay. You still can't spend 10% of your profits on just regular legal counsel. That's way too much.
Well, we have a mutual connection. So
Hmm.
um, Julia Rogers was on the podcast. I think it was back in the spring of this year. So she is the founder of Hello Prenup.
Yeah,
So what is your involvement with startups like Hello Prenup?
I mean, by the way, Julia's great, and I love their what they're doing. I was just actually just talking to her yesterday. She was in Los Angeles. We had dinner. I sometimes I help or I mentor other legal tech startups because I think, legal innovation is just a growing and burgeoning industry. It's, in fact, I think, most surveys in terms of where AI would be the most disruptive have shown that the legal industry is one of the areas that's most prone to AI disruption. And I can see that's true. And I know that lawyers are going to fight back tooth and nail to prevent that from happening. But the energy that's surrounding legal technology right now and legal innovation, it's astounding to me. I mean, I was at a legal tech conference in England, of all places, last year, and they had 2,500 people there. It was insane. I mean, the line to get in was around the block. I couldn't believe it. Like, yeah, when I started, you want to say, show all the hands. Who's into legal technology? Who wants to do, start up a new legal tech business? I mean, I don't think you could have gotten like 20 people into any conference. It was just so small.
Well, it's interesting because so with Hello Prenup, like if you listen to the episode with Julia, which is episode 336, which I'll
Mhm.
include a link to it in the show notes.
Right.
Her company got funded through Shark Tank. So that
Yeah.
included Kevin O'Leary, Nirav
Yep.
Tolia, who's founder of Nextdoor. So it like talk about a founder having, a founder of LegalZoom, Kevin O'Leary, founder of Nextdoor. Like what an amazing group
Yeah.
of mentors.
Yeah. She's got some good people. And I think she's got some smart people working at her company as well. And I think she's got a really interesting twist to not just the business, but the way she presents the business. Because I think in the end, for every successful company, you have to kind of have a personality. You can't be just a utilitarian tool. That's not going to get you that far. And the most successful businesses, whether they're online or offline, they've got something else, something deeper in what they're doing. And I think she understands that. And the Hello Prenup, the whole psyche, the whole, psychographic behind it is it's really pretty good.
All right, so we talked about your co-founder Brian Lee, who, you became friends at law school at UCLA, and he, in addition to LegalZoom, ShoeDazzle, The Honest Company. So, I mean, it just seems like there's an amazing group of entrepreneurs that were formed over this time.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was a great time. I mean, even not just us, but even some of the early employees that we worked with, I mean, they've gone on to start some great companies. And I mean, this is a great story. One of one of the interns at LegalZoom, I mean, he was a intern at the time. I don't even know if he went to business school. He was so young. He eventually went to business school. He eventually went to work at a venture capital company. And then that venture capital firm ended up taking a large position in LegalZoom. And now he's on the board of LegalZoom representing the
No
biggest
way.
investor. Yeah. And he was our intern.
That's hysterical. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, what are three apps you can't live without? Can't be like Slack, email, or calendar.
Apps I can't live without. Well, okay. The first one is I can't live without my music. So Spotify.
Hmm.
Second one is I always got to keep track of how my stocks are doing. So it's a little old school. I use Yahoo Finance. No, it's about
Okay, okay,
that's what I use.
nice.
And third one, always checking the surf. So surf line.
Okay, even better. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Any good podcast or book recommendations for entrepreneurs?
You know, I'm really into like these days neuromarketing. So I've been looking at listening to some podcasts, watch some things online, about neuromarketing and neuroscience, about really what how consumers really make decisions, because it's fascinating because it really turns you really see the world in a different way. And I think that is one of the little secrets to success that people don't talk about that often.
All right, what do you like to do outside of work?
I like exploring new restaurants. I'm into wine, and I like surfing. I take a few surf trips a year. I'm in Los Angeles, so I go out. You'll see me out there on the waves on the weekends.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story, obviously all the great work you've been doing as an entrepreneur, and obviously all the great advice.
Keith, it's been fun. Thanks for walking me down memory lane. Wow, those are some good old ones.